Sari me prakrita saga Vakritan api me shrinu Rajo Vajo Bhagavato Lilayam Harime Dasaha Sari me prakrita saga Vakritan api me shrinu Rajo Vajo Bhagavato Lilayam Harime Dasaha. Word for word. Sat. 6. Ime. All these. Prakritaha. Of the material energy. Sagaha. Creations. Vikritan. Secondary creations by Brahma. Api. Also. Me. From me. Shrinu. Just here. Rajabajaha, of the incarnation of the mode of passion. Brahma. Bhagavataha, of the greatly powerful. Leela, pastimes. Iyam, this. Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Medasaha, of one who has such a brain. Translation by His Divine Grace HG Manibandha Gopal. All the above are natural creations by the external energy of the Lord. Now hear from me about the creations by Brahma, who is an incarnation of the mode of passion and who in the matter of creation has a brain like that of the personality of Godhead. So we'll just go on to text 19. The seventh creation is that of the immovable entities, which are of 6 kinds: the fruit trees without flowers, trees and plants which exist until the fruit is ripe, creepers, pipe plants, creepers which have no support, and trees with flowers and fruits. Text 20. All the immovable trees and plants seek their subsistence upwards. They are almost unconscious, but have feelings of pain within. They are manifested in variegatedness. Text 21. The 8th creation is that of the lower species of life, and they are of different varieties, numbering 28. They are all extensively foolish and ignorant. They know their desirables by smell, but are unable to remember anything within the heart. Purport. In the Vedas, the symptoms of the lower animals are described as follows. Lower animals have knowledge only of their hunger and thirst. They have no acquired knowledge, no vision. Their behaviour exhibits no dependence on formalities. Extensively ignorant, they can know their desirables only by smell, and by such intelligence only can they understand what is favourable and unfavourable. Their knowledge is concerned only with eating and sleeping. Therefore, even the most ferocious lower animals, such as tigers, can be tamed simply by regularly supplying meals and accommodations for sleeping. Only snakes cannot be tamed by such an arrangement. So Maitreya is speaking to Vidura, explaining the process, the divisions of creation. So we're hearing so many different variegated species, of course 8,400,000 altogether, but the distinction in the Vedas is different to that of the modern scientific distinctions. Generally, the scientists, when they classify species, they're sort of looking at body types generally. You know, the shapes of the body, the colours, there may be other criteria. But the Vedic classification of species is based on consciousness. So 8,400,000 different types of consciousness can be conjured up by the living entity, by the soul. So this is a manifestation of the three modes of material nature. So three modes is like the three primary colours. So what are those three colours? Red, blue, yellow. Yes, very good. And so you combine those three colours in different, percentages, you'll get every other colour. If you want grey, grey is like black and white. It's sort of not really primary colour. But if you add like yellow and red, I think that's pink. If red and blue, you get purple. So different combinations like that. So when you see an artist working, they have the palette of paints, and you have, the main paints, and just mixing together, and they're trained to become very expert in getting exactly the particular shade. So the three modes of material nature, the three gunas, are exactly the same. That's goodness, passion, and ignorance. And when they're mixed together, you get different varieties of consciousness. So, as we heard in this verse, the lower species are primarily ignorance. So primarily the mode, that mode of ignorance. And then you get passion, and then you get goodness. So the human being, of course, comes under the influence of those three modes also. And basically everything in this material world, you can say early morning until perhaps about 10 o'clock, it's primarily mode of goodness. That's why we have our morning program, and particularly the Brahma Muhurta, about 1.5 hours before sunrise, is considered the most auspicious time to be focused on, your spiritual meditations. So from early morning up until, sort of about mid-morning or so, mode of goodness. And then from 10 until sort of perhaps mid-afternoon, later afternoon, mode of passion. That's when we get into our work and we start doing things, And then late afternoon, right up until late night, mode of ignorance. So they're those persons caught up in the mode of ignorance. That's when they're going out, trying to enjoy, going clubbing or bars or, whatever, dressed up and try to enjoy getting intoxicated, etc. That's the time for the influence of the mode of ignorance. So but of course the three modes are like soldiers as described. They're all fighting each other for prominence. So even if we're getting up early, we're coming to the temple, we can be chanting in the mode of ignorance, even though, it's primarily the influence of goodness. But if you're sort of sleeping, nodding off, you're inattentive chanting. This is chanting in the mode of ignorance. Or, in the mode of passion is trying to, punch out those rounds as quick as possible, sort of that really passionate. So, but ideally mode of goodness, that you're peaceful, you're meditative, you're focused on what you're doing. So even the different species, there's, Prabhupada describes the cow is in the mode of goodness, whereas the tiger or the lion, mode of passion, and the monkey is the mode of ignorance. So other examples you could use, but every species has a particular combination of those three modes of material nature. So it is said that the consciousness of the child when it's been conceived is influenced by the consciousness of the parents at that time of conception. So therefore in the Vedic tradition, when the husband and wife want to conceive progeny, there's a process or ritual known as Garbhadana Samskara. So Garbhadana, basic Garbha means womb, Dana means wealth or opulence. So in other words, it's purifying the consciousness So at the time of conception, a elevated soul can enter into the womb and will be naturally inclined towards spiritual life. But if it's just sort of a drunken one-night stand, so to speak, obviously you're going to attract a different type of consciousness there. So it's very important to be aware of these three modes and the influence, so that we're always trying to stay in the mode of goodness. And of course, above goodness is spiritual goodness, or Sudasattva, where we're free from the influence of these three modes of material nature. So of course, these three modes, it is Krishna's energy. He says in the Bhagavad Gita that, is that verse, Deveshu, how does it begin? Mama Maya Dharataya. It just slipped my mind. But basically, he's saying that this divine energy of mine, consisting of the three modes of material nature, Deva Esha Guramaye Mama Matarataya. So Deva Esha Guramaye. It's Krishna's energy, but it's the material, inferior energy, but consisting of the three modes. So he's saying it's very difficult to overcome, but if you surrender to me, it becomes very easy. So if we're constantly taking shelter of Krishna's instructions, taking shelter of Krishna's name or his representatives, the spiritual masters, saintly persons, we can become free from the influence of the three modes. But everybody is born in this material world under a certain combination of the modes. And depending on how a person is thinking, how they're acting, one can understand what that influence is. But regardless of how we're born, we can also be purified of those three modes, so we bring ourselves up to the mode of goodness, which is the springboard to that Sudasattva, spiritual goodness. So what we're hearing here, these set of verses, Maitreya is explaining the 9 processes of creation. So the first 6 are known as Saga, and the last 3 are known as Visarga. So Saga, the first 6, pertains to that creation that's manifested from Vishnu himself, from Mahavishnu. And that's the general sort of creation of the material manifestation. And the last 3 is created by Brahma himself, which is Visarga, secondary creation. So just use an analogy of something like if you're building a house, you'd get the builders in, they do the slab, they do the walls, they do the roof. That's like the Saga, that's Mahavishnu. So that's the primary creation. And once that's done, the secondary creation, it's like the plumbers, electrician, the cabinet makers, the tilers, the painters, all their secondary type of activity. So one way to understand it. So we did cover previous verses, the first 6. So we're hearing now of the last 3, but just to recap a little bit, that the first creation of the 9, as we said, it's material creation called the Mahatattva, manifested by Mahavishnu, and from that comes the interaction of the material modes, and it is the cause of false identification, or the false ego. So the sense that we're identifying with the body and we're identified with this material world as all in all, we don't see anything beyond that. That's influence, the hankara, or false ego. The second creation is can be described as jnana, or indicating the senses are the source of knowledge. So knowledge acquiring senses are that sort of the 5 senses that we're familiar with. The eyes, the nose, the ear, the tongue, and the skin. So that's related to With the eyes, we're seeing form. Nose, we're smelling aroma. The ears, we're hearing sound vibration. The tongue, we're tasting. And the skin is the tactile sense. We're feeling, we're aware of our environment. So this is the secondary creation. So one after the other, all these things start manifesting. And the third, sense perception. So I sort of mentioned that the senses are in contact with the relevant sense objects like taste and sound and form, etc. Of course, the ideal utilisation of these senses is the 9 processes of devotional service, which Prahlad Maharaj mentions in the 7th canto, that the hearing, chanting, remembering, worshipping the lotus feet, ultimately surrendering everything. This is the ideal way to utilise these senses. Sometimes, in one part of the Bhagavatam, it's mentioned it's identifying different things in the material world, like the eyes on the peacock feather. The peacock feather, it's very beautiful creation, but the eyes are useless because they can't see. So therefore, the comparison is if we have eyes, but we're not seeking after Krishna's beautiful form, then our eyes are like the peacock feather eyes. We're not actually seeing anything. And so like that, different analogies are given, that the perfection of our senses is to utilise them in devotional service. And so number 4, the creation of knowledge and working capacity, or in other words, the working senses. So the working senses are the arms, the legs, the belly, the anus and the genital. They all have work to do in this world. So we're utilising those senses to manifest some work in this world. Number 5, controlling deities by the interaction of the mode of goodness. So each sense is basically can be described, because we have the external manifestation of the senses, like hearing is the ears and seeing is the eyes, the nose, tongue, etc. But they also, the origin of these senses are in atomic size within the region of the heart. We have within the material body, we have the subtle body, like the gross external body. We have the subtle body in the region of the heart. So that subtle body is made up of mind, intelligence, and false ego. And within that subtle body is our cells, the jiva, and also super soul. But it's also accompanied by the senses in their atomic form, and they manifest in different ways on the body, as I said, the ears, eyes, nose, etc. But at the time of death, when we leave this body, that subtle body is transferred to its next destination. And so that mind, intelligence, false ego, the super soul, the senses, and the jiva, the personality, they're all transferred together. So that whatever Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, that whatever stage, whatever, what's the word he uses? Whatever state of mind we are thinking at the time of death, that state we attain without fail in the next life. So whatever we're thinking of, whatever consciousness, whatever desires, whatever actions that we've been performing in this life, they all influence what we're thinking of at the time of death. Time of death is like a very intense condition, as we could imagine. And we're taking shelter of that which we're closest to, or, we're whatever our most closest or personal, intimate relationship with is, that's what we're going to be thinking of, and that determines our destination in the next life. So And overriding all that are the controlling deities, the different demigods, which are supervising and overseeing all this interaction of the senses and the body, etc. And number 6 is ignorant darkness of the living entity. In other words, avidya, or ignorance. So just as we have knowledge in this world, we also have ignorance. So there's one time one reporter, somebody asked Srila Prabhupada that it seems like God is partial, that he gives favour to some people and he ignores the others. In other words, the point of the question was, why is there suffering in this world? If God is all loving, why is there suffering? So Prabhupada said, well, Krishna, he doesn't interfere with our free will. And some people choose to live in darkness. What can he do? So in other words, the laws of the material energy are there. If you breaking those laws to engage in pious activity, there is going to be some karmic reaction. And it's not that we're forced to do it, but due to our own free will, due to the influence of ignorance, we're choosing to do it, so there's going to be a reaction. So in other words, it's like we're choosing to turn our back on Krishna. So what can he do? You know, we turn our front and we offer our prayers and our devotion. Krishna is very happy, he reciprocates. But if we're choosing to turn our back, in other words, live in darkness, so we'll get the concomitant reaction to that. So Krishna doesn't force us one way or another, but according to our desire, he reciprocates. So that's the first 6 of the saga creation. So these few verses we heard today is touching on the last 3, which is Visaga, or the secondary creation by Brahma. So number 7, the 7th creation is that of the immovable entities, which are 6 in kinds. This is the translation which we read earlier. Fruit trees without flowers, trees and plants which exist until the fruit is ripe, creepers, pipe plants, creepers which have no support, and trees with flowers and fruit. So all different types of immovable entities. So obviously trees, plants, they're not moving, they're just rooted in the one particular spot. And number 8, the 8th creation is that of the lower species of life, and they are of different varieties. Number 28, Prabhupada doesn't particularly mention what the 28 are, but lower species of life, you know, we have the fish, the reptiles, etc., etc., and birds, all different types of... Of course, Super Soul, Krishna within the heart, he's in the heart of every living entity. So in the human form of life, he manifests as our conscience. Sometimes it's said to be intuition, but we say the influence of our manifests as our conscience, so a subtle voice trying to point us in a particular direction. So whether it's spiritual or material, if we're desiring to achieve a gold medal in the Olympics, Super Soul will indicate to us how to do that, if that's our desire. But if we're trying to come closer to Krishna through devotional service, he also gives us the intelligence of how to do that. So again, according to our desire, he's reciprocating to help us. But in the lower species, Super Soul is also there, but he manifests as what's sometimes called instinct. So, you know, they instinctively know how to act and what to eat and how to, you know, behave in this material world according to the direction Super Soul is giving. And the 9th process of creation, the 9th creation is human beings who are of one species only and who stop their edibles. In the human race, the mode of passion is very prominent. So sometimes it's said the country was made by God and the city is made by man. So what that basically means, mode of passion. It's trying to get ahead in the material world through fame, wealth and adoration. All these cities are the mode of passion, just trying to achieve, material achievements in this world. So as we mentioned earlier, 8,400,000 species, and so each particular species is a particular combination of those three modes, and but of that, 400,000 are considered human, not necessarily just on this planet, but throughout the universal manifestation, 400,000. But of that 400,000, only very few are considered actually civilized. So there's an interesting set of verses further on in the third canto, chapter 29, Kapila Muni. He's describing the process of Sankhya Yoga, how to analyze elements within the material world. And so I'm just going to read through them. It's like, as we hear, like Darwin's theory of evolution is that the actual body is changing over time. But the Vedas reject that idea. There is a spiritual evolution, that the soul goes from one species to the next. But it's not that the bodily forms actually change. I'll just mention that a little bit further on. But from a spiritual evolution, Kapila Muni describes that the living entities are better developed than inanimate objects. So inanimate objects, obviously like rocks, stones, etc. There's no jivas, there's no life there. In other words, no consciousness. So above that, the species of life that have the jiva in their living entities are better. And better than the entities with life symptoms are entities with a developed consciousness. So developed consciousness means some sort of awareness that I'm alive, even if it's just eating, sleeping, mating, defending, there's a concept that I'm alive and I'm interacting with this material world. Better than that are those who have developed sense perception. So they're able to perceive through their senses. And those who have developed taste are better than those who have developed a sense of touch, and those are better than those who have developed a sense of smell. So those who have developed a sense of smell above that, sense of touch above that, develop a sense of taste. So in other words, you're becoming more and more, that living entity is becoming more and more perceptive of their surrounding environment which they're existing in. So when we talk about which is better, there's particular living entities that exhibit these types of arrangements with their senses. Some just have only the sense of smell. Some are blind. Different worms or different living entities. They're blind. They may be deaf even, but they have smell, or it might be something different. They have no smell, but they can hear. There's different combinations, and all this comes down to the three modes of material nature according to the particular species they've taken birth in. So above that, even better than those who have developed the faculty to hear, and those ones distinguishing difference of form, so obviously having eyes. They can see the perception of form. And better than that are those who have teeth in both their jaws. So some living entities, they may have species just teeth in the bottom or the top, but better, according to Kapila Dev, having teeth in both jaws. Better than that are those with many legs. And above that, those with four-legged creatures are the ones better developed, while the two-legged ones, human beings, are even better. So we've gone through the 8 million species. We're getting to the 400,000 species now, to the human beings. So each species is considered a little bit higher developed than the other. And so Kapila Muni, he mentions among human beings, a society with 4 classes is the better one. So obviously the 4 classes is the Varnashram system, where it's understood that a human society that doesn't have or doesn't recognise or practice the Varnashram system is considered uncivilised in the sense. So I think it's described, there's 4 or 8 different classifications. Have the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Sudras, so the intellectual class, the warriors, administrators, the farmers and the tradesmen, and then the labourers, and below that the Yavanas and Malechas, and then there is the Rakshasas, and right at the bottom is the Chandalas. There's a couple others there as well. So according to one's intelligence and one's sort of civilised behaviour, they can be known in different categories. So 4 classes is better, and of those classes, the intellectuals are developed the best. So that's the Brahmana class. They're considered the top of the human species of life. But amongst the Brahmanas, the intellectuals, the better one is he who knows the Vedas. So one may be born in a Brahmana or exhibit Brahminical qualification, but if they actually know the Vedas, this is even higher. And above that is one who knows the purpose of the Vedas. You know, one may be able to rattle off so many different verses of the Vedas, but unless you actually know the purpose, what is the purport of the Vedas, that's even better. And above that is to know the absolute truth and 3 phases, Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan, in other words, the impersonal Brahman, Super Soul, and Krishna, the Supreme Personality. So again, higher and higher realizations, and one who puts an end to all doubts is better than he who knows what the purpose of the Vedas. And above that again, the intellectuals among them who performs his duty is better than them. So again and again, different levels, different categories of understanding. And of course, it's understood the Vaishnav is the topmost because they know who Krishna is, they have a relationship with Krishna, and they're specifically using their efforts and their desires to worship Krishna, to want to come to him more and more. So simply having a human form of life in itself, it's good, but one can always go higher and higher. So we mentioned the Darwin theory of evolution. This is actually touched on in the Padma Purana, and there is some presentation that Darwin plagiarised his theory of evolution coming from Padma Purana. I mean, whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, but whether Darwin actually even come in contact with an English edition of Padma Purana, but nevertheless, his presentation is that the body's changing according to the environment that they're in. But from a practical sort of scientific analysis of that, when a particular body changes, like a form changes, it's what can be called a mutation, so that the body is mutating. So what the scientists seem to present is that the bodies mutate according to their environment, but they seem unable to identify every particular stage the body goes through from one species to the next. Say, for instance, you have a particular species that is blind, and somehow or other it's evolved to have eyes. So from a practical point of view, you'd have to think there would be hundreds, even thousands of separate mutations to go from a blind species to a seeing species. It's not that the parents of that particular living entity were blind and its offspring is born with eyes. It doesn't happen like that. Although that's almost how Darwin's theory is almost presented. There would be hundreds, sometimes thousands of mutations would be required, and it would have to be in the right order. And how is it that, like the human form of life, our eyes are in the top of our head. If the mutation got it wrong, the eyes might work out somewhere else, which wouldn't be much use, So in other words, if we go with this theory that all the mutations happened in the right order, just randomly, the chances of that happening are basically astronomical. And on top of that, they're presenting there is no intelligence guiding this whole process, that just randomly it's happening. So it's a little bit unbelievable, to be honest, that somehow or other they just happen randomly, just in the right order. But if we're talking about instead of, like we touched on, the spiritual evolution, so if we want to properly understand evolution in one's spiritual life, you're really talking about a completely different paradigm of knowledge. Instead of utilising the material knowledge of evolution and trying to understand from the spiritual perspective, you need a whole different paradigm. So that, in other words, different types of evidence. The empirical system that the scientists are using, in other words, the result has to be tangible. You have to be able to perceive it with your senses. This won't work in the spiritual process because it's a completely different process. So say, for instance, if somebody wants to analyse something, they need to be able to predominate over it. They need to be able to control it, to measure it and analyse it in so many ways. So some people say that if God exists, he should present himself so we can see him. But God is not so cheap that he's just going to appear before you and subjecting himself to our mundane experiments, So I'll just finish up in a second. So one example I've heard is if you're applying for a job at Google, for instance, multinational company, and they've got everything you want and you've got nothing that they really need, and there's 50 other people behind you wanting to get the same job. How are you going to do that? The process is you're going to have to impress or please them somehow or other. And they become impressed by your effort, and then you may get the job. So instead of thinking God's going to come, obey our will, we have to fit ourselves in with, Krishna's program. And in that way we please him through our devotional service. And then in that way, that's the process of understanding God. So we'll end there. Thank you very much. If there's any questions or comments. Yes. Sorry, this clock's must be a little bit slow. It's not 8:30 there yet. Early, is it? Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, yes.
Earlier you were talking about two people in Krishna consciousness. When you want to conceive a child, is the consciousness of the parents that attract the soul.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about how it's also the soul's desire to come here, to turn our backs to Krishna. Is there a link between those two things? And if so, can you explain that, please?
Yeah, well, if there's an elevated soul desiring to take birth in, if in a previous life they had some spiritual sort of experience or spiritual practice, they're going to be a little bit elevated. So you're right in front of John. So the desire to take birth, because to go back to home, back to Godhead, one needs to take birth in a human form of life. It said the human form of life is the ideal vehicle by which we can practice devotional service. In the heavenly planets, there's too much enjoyment. You get overwhelmed with that enjoyment. But in this material world, there is some enjoyment but suffering. So there's an incentive to want to get out. But this material life, it's said in the 3rd canto that demigods are waiting in line to take birth in the human form of life so that they can, particularly in the Sankirtan movements, they can go back home, back to Godhead. They can see that's an ideal opportunity. So what you mentioned is a combination of both. The jiva has that desire and, by super soul's arrangement, they match up the jiva, he matches up the jiva and the parents, according to one's desire, according to one's spiritual practice and evolution, advancement. They're put in the ideal position so they continue that spiritual. At some point everybody's going to have to take birth. Until we go back to the spiritual world, birth and death is that's material existence. But where you take birth is according to your desires in your previous life and super soul's arrangement. So it's a combination of both. Taking birth in a family of devotees is not turning your back on Krishna, it's continuing your spiritual life. But if your desire is simply just to enjoy gross sense gratification, that's taking birth in the mode of ignorance, that's turning your back on Krishna. But once again, that's a result of your previous activities, as just continuing, afterwards. Last question, Lucas. Is it working?
Hare Krishna.
Okay.
Just on the same question.
Yeah.
So people born in devotee families that don't take to the movement, what's the script with that then? Because
that's according to their free will. Everyone has a choice. That they're put into a place, a position, they continue their spiritual life if they so choose. It's like you might be given $1 million in lottery inheritance or whatever. So you can invest it nicely or you can whimsically spend it. That's your free will. You have a choice with that. So similarly, whatever position we're taking birth in this material world, it's a result of our past activities. But if we, bad association, we make wrong choices, we can squander that facility. So again, it's always our free will. We're not going to be forced that you've taken birth in a devotee family. Super Soul is forcing us to continue. That free will is always there. Always there. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.